One queen walked barefoot through frozen city streets to pray for her people. Another literally kissed the diseased feet of outcasts. And a third, a child bride in a foreign land, secretly gave away royal food to the starving. These women, rulers in a brutal age, also pawned their glittering jewels not for power, but for bread, and faced down angry courtiers to build havens for the sick and the poor. One even fled for her life as a refugee before becoming a beloved saint, all while wielding immense power and changing the course of nations through their unwavering faith and boundless compassion. Number 6. Isabella I of Castile, the queen who reshaped a nation in faith's name. Isabella I became Queen of Castile in 1474, a realm in what we now call Spain. She wasn't born to be the undisputed heir. Her path to the throne was filled with political maneuvering and even conflict with her own half-brother, King Henry IV. From a young age, Isabella was known for her strong will and her deep, unwavering Catholic faith. This faith would become a defining feature of her reign, influencing everything from her personal life to the grand policies that shaped her kingdom and echoed across the globe. She married Ferdinand II of Aragon, and together they were known as the Catholic monarchs, a title bestowed upon them by Pope Alexander VI. Their marriage united the two largest kingdoms in Spain, laying the groundwork for a unified nation. Isabella's personal piety was intense. She attended Mass daily, observed long fasts, and spent many hours in prayer. She wasn't just a queen who went through religious motions. Contemporaries reported that her devotion was genuine and deeply felt. She chose confessors who were known for their strictness and piety, like Hernando de Talavera, who encouraged her simple lifestyle despite her royal status. Even amidst the grandeur of the Castilian court, Isabella often preferred plain dress when not on official duty, and was said to eat sparingly. She believed that rulers were accountable to God for the spiritual well-being of their people, and this belief drove many of her actions. She initiated significant reforms within the Catholic Church in Spain, aiming to improve the education and morality of the clergy. She supported the establishment of new religious houses and the reform of existing ones, wanting to ensure that the Church was a strong and pure institution. Her charitable works were also notable, often intertwined with her religious convictions and her role as a queen in an era of frequent warfare. During the Long Granada War, the final stage of the Reconquista to reclaim Spanish territory from Moorish rule, Isabella was not a distant queen. She often traveled with the army, not as a combatant, but as a source of inspiration and, crucially, as an organizer of care. She is credited with establishing some of the earliest military field hospitals known as Queen's Hospitals. These mobile units provided medical attention to wounded soldiers, a revolutionary concept for the time. She didn't just fund these. She was reportedly involved in their organization and ensuring they were staffed. This concern for the welfare of her soldiers extended to her personal involvement in tending to the sick and wounded when possible, an act that greatly endeared her to her troops and people. Beyond the battlefield, she also endowed permanent hospitals and charitable institutions in various cities throughout Castile. These institutions were meant to care for the poor, the sick, and orphans, reflecting a traditional Christian duty of charity that Isabella took very seriously. However, Isabella's intense piety also led to policies that had severe consequences. Driven by her desire for religious uniformity in her kingdom, which she believed was essential for its stability and spiritual health, she and Ferdinand authorized the Spanish Inquisition in 1478. This ecclesiastical tribunal was established to identify and punish heresy, primarily focusing on conversos. Jews who had converted to Christianity were suspected of secretly practicing Judaism. Thousands faced investigation, persecution, and harsh penalties, including death. In 1492, the same year that Granada fell, and Columbus sailed to the Americas under her patronage, Isabella and Ferdinand issued the Alhambra Decree. This edict ordered the expulsion of all practicing Jews from Castile and Aragon who refused to convert to Catholicism. Tens of thousands were forced to leave their homes, creating a significant upheaval and a tragic chapter in Spanish history. A similar edict was later issued for Muslims. These actions, while seen by Isabella as necessary for the purification and unification of her kingdom under one faith, caused immense suffering. Her funding of Christopher Columbus's voyage was also partly motivated by a desire to spread Christianity to new lands, seeing it as a divine mission. She insisted that any indigenous peoples encountered should be treated humanely and converted to Christianity, though this directive was often tragically ignored by colonists and conquistadors. Isabella's legacy remains complex. A queen of profound personal faith and demonstrable charity in some areas, who also enacted policies of religious intolerance with devastating human costs, all driven by the fervent religious convictions of her time. She died in 1504, leaving behind a profoundly changed Spain. Number 5. Matilda of Scotland, the good queen who washed lepers' feet. Matilda of Scotland, originally named Edith, was born around 1080. She was a princess with an impressive lineage. Her father was King Malcolm III of Scotland, and her mother was Saint Margaret of Scotland, a queen renowned for her piety and charity. More on her later. This upbringing deeply influenced Matilda. After her father's death and ensuing chaos in Scotland, Matilda and her sister Mary were sent to England and placed in the care of their aunt, Christina, abbess of Romsey Abbey, and later Wilton Abbey. Here, Matilda received a good education, learned Latin, and was immersed in a religious environment. There was even talk of her becoming a nun, a path common for noblewomen seeking refuge or a scholarly life. However, destiny had other plans. In 1100, she married King Henry I of England, the son of William the Conqueror. Her Anglo-Saxon royal blood, through her mother's line, was seen as a way to legitimize further the Norman dynasty and heal some of the rifts between the Normans and the English. To mark her new role and perhaps to sound more Norman, her name was changed from Edith to Matilda upon her marriage. Queen Matilda quickly became beloved by the English people, earning the nickname Matilda the Good or Good Queen Maud. Her piety was not just for show, it was a lived reality. She was known for her deep devotion, her regular attendance at church services, and her acts of humility. One of the most striking stories about her, recorded by her confessor, the monk and historian William of Malmesbury, involved her actions during Lent. It was said that Matilda would go to Westminster Abbey, and there she would wash and kiss the feet of the poor and even lepers. Leprosy was a terrifying disease in the medieval period, and those afflicted were often outcasts. For a queen to not only wash their feet, but also kiss them, was an extraordinary act of humility and compassion, directly modeling Christ's actions with his disciples. Her husband, King Henry I, reportedly once saw her doing this and questioned her, perhaps concerned about the risk or the royal dignity. Matilda's reported response was that she was doing it for the King of Kings. This demonstrated a piety that went beyond conventional royal behavior. Matilda's charity extended far beyond these personal acts of devotion. She was a significant patron of religious institutions and public works. She founded the Holy Trinity Priory in Aldgate, London in 1108, which became one of the wealthiest and most influential religious houses in the city. She also established the Hospital of St. Giles in the Fields for lepers, a testament to her particular concern for those suffering from the disease. This was a significant act, providing dedicated care for a marginalized group. Her charitable efforts were not limited to London. She commissioned the building of the first arched bridge in England at Stratford-le-Bow in East London, and also other bridges and causeways to improve travel and trade, which benefited ordinary people. She even ordered the construction of public baths at Queenhithe in London, showing a concern for public hygiene. Matilda was also a patron of learning and the arts. She commissioned a biography of her mother, Saint Margaret, which helped to preserve Margaret's story and promote her sainthood. She corresponded with Archbishop Anselm of Canterbury, a leading theologian of the time, discussing religious and moral matters. Her court was known for its culture and refinement, partly due to her influence. Matilda's life as queen was not without its political dimensions. She acted as regent for Henry I on several occasions when he was away in Normandy, handling state affairs capably. She bore Henry at least 2 children who survived to adulthood: Matilda, who would later contend for the English throne, and William Adelin, the heir apparent whose tragic death in the White Ship disaster in 1120 occurred after Queen Matilda's own death. Matilda herself passed away in 1118 at Westminster Palace and was buried in Westminster Abbey. Her tomb inscription reportedly praised her as distinguished for her piety, liberal in her charity. She excelled all her contemporaries amongst queens. Her reputation as Good Queen Maud endured for centuries, a testament to the genuine impact of her piety and extensive charitable works on the people of England. She set a high bar for queenly conduct, combining royal duty with profound personal faith and a deep commitment to the welfare of the less fortunate. Number 4. Blanche of Castile, the Iron Regent with a pious heart. Blanche of Castile was born in 1188 in Palencia, Spain. She was the daughter of King Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England, which made her the granddaughter of the formidable Eleanor of Aquitaine and King Henry II of England. This incredible lineage placed her at the heart of European royal politics from birth. At the tender age of 12, she was chosen by her grandmother Eleanor to marry Louis, the heir to the French throne, as part of a peace treaty between France and England. The elderly Eleanor of Aquitaine herself escorted young Blanche across the Pyrenees to her new life in France. In 1200, Blanche married Louis, who would later become King Louis VIII. Their marriage was reportedly a strong one, and Blanche proved to be not just a supportive wife, but also a woman of immense capability and strong character. She was deeply religious from a young age, a trait that would heavily influence her life and reign. Blanche became Queen of France in 1223, when her husband ascended the throne as Louis VIII. His reign, however, was short. Louis VIII died of dysentery in 1226, while returning from a campaign against the Cathar heretics in the south of France. This left Blanche a widow with a young son, Louis IX, who was only 12 years old. In a period when powerful nobles often sought to usurp royal authority during a minority rule, Blanche stepped into the role of regent for her son with remarkable strength and political acumen. She faced numerous rebellions from disgruntled barons who underestimated her resolve. Blanche, however, proved to be a masterful politician. She skillfully navigated complex alliances, used diplomacy when possible, and was not afraid to use military force when necessary to secure her son's throne and maintain the integrity of the kingdom. Her regency was so successful that she effectively governed France for many years. Throughout her life, and especially during her regency, Blanche's profound piety was evident. She was intensely devout and ensured that her children, particularly Louis IX, received a rigorous religious upbringing. She instilled in Louis a deep sense of justice, Christian duty, and personal morality, which would later lead to him being canonized as Saint Louis. It was said that she told him she would rather see him die than commit a mortal sin. This strong religious conviction guided her own actions as regent. She was a staunch supporter of the church and religious orders. Blanche founded two significant Cistercian abbeys, Royaumont Abbey, north of Paris, in 1228, in fulfillment of her late husband's will, but with her active involvement, and Maubuisson Abbey, near Pontoise, in 1236, where she herself would later be buried. These foundations were not just acts of personal piety. They were also centers of prayer, learning, and charity, contributing to the spiritual and social fabric of the kingdom. She also patronized other religious communities and supported reforms aimed at strengthening the church. Blanche's charity was often expressed through her support for these religious institutions, which in turn provided aid to the poor and sick. Her concern for justice was also a key aspect of her rule. She worked to ensure fair administration in the kingdom, protecting the rights of the church, and, where possible, the common people against the overreach of powerful nobles. While she was a formidable political figure, known for her sternness and unyielding will when it came to protecting her son's rights and the kingdom's stability, her personal life was marked by religious observance and a commitment to Christian values. Even after Louis IX came of age, Blanche remained his closest advisor. When Louis IX embarked on the Seventh Crusade in 1248, he entrusted the regency of France to his mother once again. She governed with her accustomed skill and dedication until her death in 1252. She passed away at the age of 64 in Paris, reportedly wearing the Cistercian habit, and was buried at Maubuisson Abbey. Blanche of Castile is remembered as one of the most powerful and effective women of the Middle Ages, a queen who combined astute political leadership with deep personal piety and a commitment to the religious and moral well-being of her kingdom. Her influence on her son, St. Louis, one of France's most revered kings, was profound, shaping him into a ruler famed for his justice and faith. Number 3. Saint Hedwig of Silesia, the Duchess who walked barefoot in winter. Hedwig was born around 1174 in Andechs Castle, Bavaria, a daughter of Berthold IV, Duke of Merania, a powerful German nobleman. Her family was well-connected and pious. One of her sisters, Gertrude, became Queen of Hungary and was the mother of Saint Elizabeth of Hungary. More on her soon. Another sister became an abbess. From a young age, Hedwig was known for her gentle nature and her inclination towards religious devotion. At the age of 12, she was married to Henry I, the Bearded, Duke of Silesia, a region in what is now Poland. Despite the arranged nature of the marriage common at the time, It seems to have been a union of mutual respect. Together, they had 7 children, though, tragically, Hedwig would outlive all but one daughter, Gertrude. These personal losses undoubtedly deepened her existing piety. As Duchess of Silesia, Hedwig used her position and wealth to foster religious life and engage in extensive charitable works. Her most significant foundation was the Cistercian nunnery at Trebnitz, in 1202, established with her husband's support. This monastery became a major spiritual center in Silesia. Hedwig herself often retreated there for prayer and spiritual renewal, and she had a small house built for herself near the monastery where she could live a more ascetic life. She greatly desired to take monastic vows herself, but her husband Henry reportedly asked her not to do so formally while he was alive. Though they did take mutual vows of chastity later in their marriage after many years together. After Henry's death in 1238, Hedwig fully retired to Trebnica, living as a lay sister under the authority of her daughter Gertrude, who had become the abbess. She never took formal vows, perhaps to retain control over her dowry, which she continued to use for charitable purposes. Hedwig's personal asceticism was legendary. She was known to practice severe mortifications, wearing a hair shirt beneath her clothes and engaging in long fasts. One of the most famous stories about her is that she would walk barefoot even in the harsh Silesian winters as an act of penance and humility. Her confessor, concerned for her health, reportedly urged her to wear shoes. Hedwig, in obedience, would then carry her shoes in her hands or under her arm, but continued to walk barefoot. This image of the Duchess, treading through snow and ice without shoes, became a powerful symbol of her piety. She devoted herself to prayer, often spending entire nights in church. She particularly venerated the Virgin Mary and had a small ivory statue of Mary and Jesus that she carried with her, which is now a treasured relic. Her charity was boundless. Hedwig personally cared for the poor, the sick, and prisoners. She would visit hospitals, tend to the ill with her own hands, and distribute food and clothing to those in need. She established hospices and guest houses for travelers and the destitute. She had a particular concern for widows, orphans, and those in debt, often using her own resources to relieve their burdens. It was said that she would regularly invite a group of 13 poor people, representing Christ and the 12 apostles, to dine with her, serving them herself. She also intervened in political matters, often advocating for peace and reconciliation between warring nobles or trying to mitigate the harshness of justice. She used her influence to protect the vulnerable and to promote Christian values in the governance of Silesia. After a life dedicated to God and service to others, Hedwig died at Trebnica on October 15, 1243. Her reputation for holiness was so widespread that she was canonized as a saint by Pope Clement IV in 1267, just 24 years after her death. Saint Hedwig of Silesia is remembered as a model of Christian virtue, a noblewoman who embraced humility, austerity, and tireless charity, leaving a lasting legacy of faith and compassion in Central Europe. Number 2. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, the princess who chose rags over riches. Elizabeth was born in 1207, likely in Saraspatak Castle in the Kingdom of Hungary. She was a princess, the daughter of King Andrew II of Hungary and Gertrude of Merania, who was, as mentioned, the sister of Saint Hedwig of Silesia, making Elizabeth Hedwig's niece. From her very earliest childhood, Elizabeth displayed an extraordinary piety and a profound empathy for the poor. Stories from her youth tell of her giving away her toys, her food, and even her clothes to needy children. At the age of just 4, she was betrothed to Ludwig, the son of Landgrave Hermann I of Thuringia, a region in modern Germany, and was sent to the Thuringian court at Wartburg Castle to be raised as his future wife. This was a common practice for royal alliances, but it meant a childhood far from home, in a sometimes unfriendly environment. At the Wartburg, a magnificent castle, perched high on a hill, the young Elizabeth often clashed with the lavish and worldly court culture. While others enjoyed finery and feasting, Elizabeth preferred simplicity and prayer. She would secretly take food from the castle stores to distribute to the poor who gathered at the gates. Her mother-in-law, Sophie, and other members of the court sometimes disapproved of her intense piety and her disregard for royal etiquette, seeing her charitable excesses as unbecoming of her station. However, her betrothed, Ludwig, who became Landgrave Ludwig IV in 1217, deeply loved and supported her. They married in 1221, when Elizabeth was 14 and Ludwig was 21. Their marriage was reportedly a very happy one, and Ludwig staunchly defended Elizabeth's charitable activities against criticism from his family and courtiers. He seemed to understand and admire her unique devotion. One of the most famous legends associated with Elizabeth is the miracle of the roses. According to the story, she was once secretly carrying bread hidden in her apron to give to the poor when she encountered Ludwig, or sometimes his disapproving brother. When asked what she was carrying, she opened her apron, and instead of bread, it was filled with beautiful roses, a sign of divine approval for her charity, especially as this supposedly happened in winter when roses would not naturally bloom. Elizabeth's charitable works were extensive and hands-on. She didn't just donate money. She personally involved herself in the care of the needy. She would spin wool and make clothes for the poor. She visited the sick in their homes, tending to their needs, cleaning their wounds, and comforting them. After a devastating famine and plague struck Thuringia in 1226 while Ludwig was away in Italy attending the imperial diet, Elizabeth took charge. She emptied the royal granaries to feed the starving, sold her own jewels and luxurious garments to raise money for relief, and even set up a hospital at the foot of Wartburg Castle, where she herself tended to the sick, including those suffering from leprosy, a disease that made them outcasts. She was said to have bathed them, fed them, and bandaged their sores without any regard for her own safety or royal dignity. Tragedy struck in 1227. Ludwig IV, devoted to both Elizabeth and his faith, joined the Sixth Crusade, led by Emperor Frederick II. He died of a fever in Otranto, Italy, before even reaching the Holy Land. Elizabeth was devastated by the news of her beloved husband's death, reportedly crying out, "The world is dead to me, and all that was joyous in it." She was only 20 years old. Following Ludwig's death, Elizabeth's situation at court became precarious. Her brother-in-law, Heinrich Raspe, who became regent for her young son Hermann, was less sympathetic to her extreme charity. Accounts differ on the exact circumstances, but Elizabeth was eventually forced to leave Wartburg Castle, possibly due to ongoing conflicts over her charitable spending or political machinations. For a time, she and her children lived in poverty, seeking shelter where they could. Eventually, her family members intervened, and provisions were made for her. She could have returned to a comfortable, noble life, but Elizabeth chose a different path. She sent her children to be cared for by others, and in 1228 formally renounced the world, becoming a tertiary, a lay member, of the Order of St. Francis. She moved to Marburg and used her remaining dowry to build a hospital dedicated to St. Francis. There she spent the rest of her short life in complete service to the sick and the poorest of the poor, living in austerity and performing the most menial tasks. She died in Marburg in November 1231, at the incredibly young age of 24. Her holiness was immediately recognized, and miracles were reported at her tomb. She was canonized as a saint by Pope Gregory IX just 4 years later, in 1235. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary remains one of the most beloved medieval saints, a symbol of selfless Christian charity and compassion. Number 1. Saint Margaret of Scotland, the refugee princess who transformed a kingdom's faith. Margaret was born around 1045 in Hungary. This might seem surprising for a future Queen of Scotland, but her early life was one of exile. She was an English princess, the daughter of Edward the Exile and granddaughter of Edmund Ironside, an Anglo-Saxon king of England. Her family had been forced to flee England when the Danish king Canute seized the throne. So Margaret spent her formative years at the Hungarian court, which was known for its strong Christian faith. She received a good education and was noted for her intelligence and piety, even as a young girl. Around 1057, her family was recalled to England by King Edward the Confessor, who was childless and considering Margaret's father as a possible heir. However, her father died shortly after their arrival, and then came the Norman conquest of England in 1066, led by William the Conqueror. This event threw England into turmoil and made life precarious for the remaining Anglo-Saxon nobility. Around 1068, Margaret, along with her mother Agatha and siblings, decided to flee England, intending to return to Hungary. However, a storm blew their ship off course, and they landed on the coast of Scotland, at a place now called St. Margaret's Hope in Fife. In Scotland, they sought the protection of King Malcolm III, also known as Malcolm Canmore. Malcolm was a powerful and somewhat rugged warrior king. He was widowed at the time and was captivated by the cultured and devout Princess Margaret. Around 1070, they were married in Dunfermline. Margaret, now Queen of Scotland, was around 24 or 25 years old. Despite the stark contrast between her refined, pious upbringing and the relatively less polished Scottish court, Margaret quickly set about using her influence. She was not just a queen consort. She became a significant agent of change, particularly in religious matters. She found that the Scottish Church, while Christian, had retained many practices from its Celtic Christian roots that differed from those of Rome and the rest of Western Europe. Margaret, deeply committed to the Roman Church, worked to align Scottish religious practices with those of the continent. She initiated councils and synods where she, with her knowledge of Latin and theology, would debate with Scottish clergy. She promoted the observance of Lent, Easter communion, Sunday reverence, and marriage laws according to Roman standards. She encouraged the founding of monasteries, following the Benedictine rule which was prevalent in Europe. Dunfermline Abbey, founded by her and Malcolm, became a major center of this new religious influence and eventually the burial place for Scottish royalty. Margaret's personal piety was profound and a driving force in her life. Her biographer, Turgot, who was her confessor and later Bishop of St. Andrews, wrote a detailed account of her life, highlighting her virtues. He described her as spending long hours in prayer, often late into the night and early in the morning. She was devoted to reading scripture and religious texts. She observed rigorous fasts, sometimes to the detriment of her own health. She was known for her humility, despite her royal status. Margaret also had a deep love for beautiful religious objects and churches. She ensured that churches were properly adorned with rich vestments, altar cloths embroidered with gold and silver, and sacred vessels. One famous story concerns her personal gospel book. It was said to have been accidentally dropped into a river, but was later recovered, miraculously undamaged by the water. This book, known as St. Margaret's Gospels, or Queen Margaret's Gospels, still survives and is a treasured relic in the Bodleian Library, Oxford. Her charity was as legendary as her piety. Turgot recorded that every morning before she herself ate, Margaret would wash the feet of 6 poor people and serve them food with her own hands. During Advent and Lent, she and King Malcolm would reportedly invite as many as 300 poor people into the great hall of their castle, serving them a meal. Margaret would personally attend to the needs of orphans and widows. She was particularly concerned for English captives, who had been brought to Scotland during various conflicts. She would often use her own money or persuade the king to ransom them, setting them free. She founded hostels for pilgrims and travelers. Her charitable activities were not just about giving alms. They were about personal service and compassion. She brought a new level of refinement and Christian devotion to the Scottish court, influencing not only religious practices but also manners and culture. She encouraged education and the arts. Even King Malcolm, who was unlettered, was said to have been deeply influenced by his wife's piety. Though he couldn't read her devotional books, he would reportedly kiss them and have them adorned with gold and jewels out of respect for her faith. Margaret bore Malcolm 8 children, 3 of whom became kings of Scotland, Edgar Alexander I and David I, and one daughter, Matilda, or Edith, became Queen of England by marrying Henry I. The good Queen Maud we heard about earlier. These children continued her legacy of piety and reform. Margaret fell gravely ill in 1093. Just days before her death, she received news that her husband, Malcolm, and their eldest son, Edward, had been killed in battle at Alnwick in England. She died on November 16th, 1093, at Edinburgh Castle, at the age of about 48. Her life of extraordinary piety, charity, and reform led to her being canonized as a saint by Pope Innocent IV in 1250. Saint Margaret became the patron saint of Scotland, revered for centuries as a model queen and a holy woman who dedicated her life to God and her adopted country,